Imagine this for decades whenever the world needed gold for its banks, cocoa for its chocolate, or cobalt for its electric cars, all eyes turned quietly to Africa. Raw materials flowed out, wealth was built abroad, and African nations were left with little more than empty promises. But today that script is being torn apart. The shock is not in Africa this time, it is in the capitals of Europe and America, where leaders are waking up to a truth they never wanted to face. Because here is the reality, Africa is no longer waiting for permission. More than 10 nations are putting hard limits on the export of raw resources. Ghana is demanding that its gold enrich its own reserves first. Uganda is roasting its own coffee beans before sending them to the world. Niger has thrown a wrench into France's nuclear lifeline by controlling uranium. And countries from Namibia to Ivory Coast are insisting that if the world wants Africa's treasures, they must pay the true price or invest directly on African soil. This is not just about trade, it is about sovereignty, dignity, and power. For the first time in modern history, Africa is standing tall, not as a silent supplier, but as a continent that can dictate terms. Western industries that once thrived on cheap inputs now face rising costs, broken supply chains, and a simple but powerful message: no more giveaways, no more silence. And so we must ask if Africa is no longer on the defensive, but instead holding leverage the world never expected. How will the balance of power shift in the years ahead? Can Western nations adapt, or will they resist this new order? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, we will uncover how this wave of bold decisions, from gold to cocoa, from uranium to lithium, is not just shaking markets, but rewriting the global story. If you believe Africa's rise deserves to be heard beyond the headlines, make sure to subscribe and share this video, because the truth is unfolding right now, and you are among the first to see it. For centuries, the global economy treated Africa as nothing more than a vast warehouse. Oil, gold, uranium, lithium, timber, coffee, cocoa, you name it, it flowed out of the continent at bargain prices. The wealth was extracted, shipped abroad, and transformed into fortunes for foreign corporations. Meanwhile, local communities were left with broken roads, meager wages, and fragile economies. It was the old colonial script replayed again and again, dressed up with new names like partnerships or aid. But underneath, the imbalance never changed. That script is breaking. Across the continent, leaders are making bold moves to rewrite the rules. And these aren't isolated gestures, they form a sweeping wave of defiance rooted in the demand for sovereignty and self-respect. The story of Ghana is a perfect starting point. Ghana, long one of the world's top gold producers, decided it had had enough of being merely a supplier. For decades, tons of raw gold left its soil, refined abroad into bullion or jewelry, with the real profits pocketed far from Accra. But in 2023, Ghana struck back. A new policy required mining companies to sell 20% of refined gold directly to the country's central bank. The goal was twofold: build strong national reserves and reduce dependence on foreign currencies like the US dollar or the euro, which had repeatedly left Ghana vulnerable to inflation and global financial shocks. This wasn't just accounting, it was a national declaration. Our gold must serve our people first. The ripple effect was immediate. Local refining industries gained a boost. The central bank accumulated wealth in hard assets, not just paper promises. And global gold traders suddenly had to adjust, because Ghana was no longer sending unprocessed treasure out the door for pennies. Instead, it was holding onto its value, ensuring that more of the wealth stayed home. For the first time in decades, Ghana was acting not as a supplier, but as a strategist. From gold to coffee, Uganda followed a similar path. In 2021, it stunned the world by banning the export of raw agricultural products, including coffee beans and tea leaves. Uganda, one of the planet's top coffee producers, was tired of watching farmers toil in the fields while international corporations scooped up the lion's share of profits. The new law forced a transformation. Instead of raw beans shipped off to Italy or Switzerland, Uganda began roasting and packaging its coffee domestically. The difference in value was staggering. A bag of roasted branded coffee sells for many times the price of raw beans. By insisting on value-added exports, Uganda was not only protecting its farmers, but also creating new industries, jobs, and pride at home. And then came Gabon, with a policy that looked small on paper, but reshaped its entire economy. Back in 2010, the country banned the export of raw logs. To many outsiders, it seemed like an inconvenience. To Gabonese leaders, it was a declaration of control. For decades, European companies had cut down Gabon's forests, shipped the logs overseas, and turned them into luxury furniture and flooring. Gabon got crumbs while Paris and Rome thrived. But with the ban, local industries sprang up, furniture making, carpentry, and large-scale wood manufacturing. Jobs multiplied, revenue soared, and Gabon was no longer in the shadows of someone else's supply chain. By the mid-2010s, Mozambique joined this timber revolution, imposing its own restrictions on raw log exports. Factories grew, workers found new opportunities, and instead of shipping out unprocessed wood, Mozambique began selling finished products stamped "Made in Africa." The symbolism was as powerful as the economics. No longer would its forests be treated as giveaways for foreign wealth. These examples, Ghana with gold, Uganda with coffee, Gabon and Mozambique with timber, are not isolated cases. They mark the beginning of a coordinated shift across Africa. Each nation is saying in its own way, if our resources can build foreign prosperity, they can and must build our own first. It's not only about money, it's about dignity, about rewriting the relationship between Africa and the rest of the world. For too long, Western economies thrived on the assumption that Africa would stay silent forever, supplying cheap raw materials. But from Accra to Kampala, from Libreville to Maputo, leaders are proving that silence is over. The age of passive supply is ending. Africa is stepping into a new identity as a decision maker, not just a donor of raw wealth. This is the foundation of a seismic power shift, and it is only the beginning. If Ghana's gold and Uganda's coffee were tremors, what happened next was an earthquake. The continent's quiet defiance escalated into a direct confrontation with the very foundations of Western power. And nowhere was this clash more visible than in Niger. For decades, France's energy grid, nearly 70% powered by nuclear energy, rested on one silent pillar: uranium from Niger. Year after year, convoys of yellowcake uranium left Niger's mines at bargain basement prices. The paradox was painful. Paris glowed with light, its economy humming, while Niger remained one of the poorest nations on Earth. Families lived without electricity, even as their land fueled Europe's power. It was a quiet injustice few dared to challenge. Until recently, when Niger placed new restrictions on uranium exports, the effect was immediate. Suddenly, France's confidence in its energy independence cracked wide open. Costs soared, supplies tightened, and for the first time in decades, the French state had to confront just how fragile its lifeline really was. The message was blunt: no more giveaways, no more silent extraction. Niger was claiming its worth. And as uranium prices climbed, so did Niger's dignity. The lights in Europe flickered both literally and metaphorically as one African nation pressed pause on centuries of exploitation. But uranium was not the only flashpoint. In Ivory Coast, the heartbeat of the world's cocoa trade, another storm was brewing. For generations, the story was the same: billions in profits poured into Western chocolate companies while Ivorian farmers lived at the edge of poverty. But in a groundbreaking decision, the government placed restrictions on raw cocoa exports. The logic was simple yet revolutionary. Why should the nation that grows most of the world's cocoa remain stuck at the bottom of the value chain? Factories for processing cocoa and producing chocolate began to emerge inside Ivory Coast. Jobs were created, new industries grew, and the world's chocolate giants suddenly faced a choice: either invest locally on African terms or lose access to the supply they had long taken for granted. The result was a shudder across the global sweets industry. A single African policy had redrawn the rules of a billion-dollar business. The Democratic Republic of the Congo took this defiance even further. Sitting on staggering reserves of cobalt and copper, two minerals critical to electric vehicles, smartphones, and renewable energy, DRC leaders decided the old model of raw exports was over. No longer would their country be just a pit stop in the green economy. New rules demanded more processing inside Congolese borders. This forced global tech giants and automakers to rethink their supply chains. Either they would build infrastructure in Africa, creating jobs and paying fairer prices, or they would face higher costs and tighter supplies. In one stroke, the DRC stepped out of the shadows of exploitation and into the spotlight as a power player in the energy transition the West claims to champion. Namibia added fuel to the fire with lithium, the metal at the center of the electric vehicle revolution. By pausing raw lithium exports, Namibia sent a direct warning to Western automakers and tech firms: if you want our lithium, you will build with us. This was not isolationism. It was partnership on Africa's terms. Yet the panic in Western capitals was unmistakable. The very dream of a clean energy future was now tied to negotiations with African nations determined to protect their sovereignty. These moves struck nerves worldwide. Markets shook, prices surged, and boardrooms in Europe and America scrambled for alternatives. But behind the numbers lay something far more powerful, a new sense of pride across Africa. For the first time in living memory, ordinary citizens watched their governments stand up to the world and win concessions. Farmers in Uganda saw their coffee sold for its true value. Workers in Gabon and Mozambique found jobs in industries once reserved for Europe. Communities in Niger felt the dignity of holding power over uranium, the resource that had long defined their suffering. The climax of this story is not just in policy, it is in emotion. Africa is no longer the silent engine of global progress. It is speaking loudly, and the world is being forced to listen. From Paris to Washington, from Berlin to Tokyo, powerful nations that once dictated terms are now reacting to Africa's terms. The imbalance that defined centuries of trade is collapsing, and in its place stands a continent unafraid to claim its due. This is the moment the tide turned from quiet defiance to loud disruption, from scattered reforms to a continental wave. And the world's reaction proves just how unprepared it was for Africa's rise. When nations redraw the rules of trade, the effects ripple far beyond factories and boardrooms. What Africa is doing today is not just an economic maneuver, it is reshaping the daily lives of citizens, redefining politics, and rebuilding the relationship between governments and their people. Take Guinea, for instance. For years, the country exported staples like rice, maize, and yams to foreign markets, while its own citizens faced shortages and rising prices. Families struggled to put food on the table, even as shiploads of grain left for wealthier countries. The contradiction was cruel and unsustainable, so Guinea acted. By banning the export of these essential crops, the government sent a message: our people come first. The impact was immediate. Local markets stabilized, and while international buyers scrambled, families at home could breathe a little easier. This was more than food policy. It was food sovereignty, proof that independence begins with the ability to feed one's own. In Ivory Coast, the shift in cocoa policy brought a wave of new factories and training programs. For decades, young Ivorians dreamed of better jobs, but found only backbreaking work in the fields. Now, with chocolate production and processing plants springing up inside the country, opportunities are opening. These jobs are not just wages, they are a new ladder of social mobility, a chance for young people to stay, to build, and to dream in their own homeland. In Mozambique and Gabon, the bans on raw timber exports created similar stories. Local carpenters who once struggled in tiny workshops suddenly found themselves supplying larger industries. New furniture companies appeared, and for the first time, the Made in Africa label began to carry weight in global wood markets. Thousands of jobs emerged, and with them, dignity. Workers were no longer invisible cogs in a foreign supply chain. They were builders of national industries, providers for their families, contributors to their economies. These economic changes are reshaping politics too. Leaders who once risked being seen as mere administrators of foreign interests are now celebrated as defenders of sovereignty. In Ghana, the decision to retain more gold within national borders has boosted confidence in the government. Citizens see concrete steps to protect their wealth and shield their economy from global shocks. In Niger, the stand over uranium turned into a rallying cry, uniting a population long divided by hardship. People who once felt voiceless in the global system now feel represented in the bold decisions of their leaders. But perhaps the deepest change is psychological. Across the continent, ordinary Africans are beginning to believe that sovereignty is not just a slogan, it can be lived. When Guinea protects its food, when Uganda adds value to its coffee, when Namibia controls lithium, citizens feel a new sense of pride. They are no longer watching their wealth slip away to foreign hands. They are seeing it stay, circulate, and grow at home. That pride fuels political stability, strengthens the bond between people and government, and inspires further action. Of course, these shifts are not without challenges. Building local industries requires investment, infrastructure, and time. Western corporations, unhappy with rising costs, will try to pressure, lobby, and even destabilize governments. Some elites inside Africa may resist change, preferring the old arrangements that benefited them personally. But the broader trend is undeniable. People see the benefits, and they are unlikely to accept a return to the old model. In the end, the political consequence is this: Africa is moving from dependence to independence, from silence to voice. Economically, it is keeping more value at home. Socially, it is giving people jobs, pride, and stability. Politically, it is forging leaders who embody sovereignty in action. Together, these effects mark the beginning of a transformation that goes beyond policy. They signal a deeper shift in what it means to live, work, and lead in Africa today. While Africa's new wave of resource sovereignty is transforming life on the continent, its shockwaves are just as powerful abroad. For the first time in decades, the West is confronting a reality it never planned for Africa as a decision maker, not a silent supplier. In Europe, the impact has been dramatic. France, so dependent on uranium from Niger to keep its nuclear grid alive, is scrambling to secure new deals. Energy costs are rising, and the once comfortable idea of energy independence is collapsing under the weight of African leverage. Meanwhile, chocolate companies in Switzerland and Belgium, giants who relied on Ivory Coast's cheap cocoa, are facing tighter supplies and higher costs. Their business models, long built on underpaid farmers, now require restructuring in the face of Africa's new rules. In the United States, the focus is sharper on technology and clean energy. American automakers racing to dominate the electric vehicle market rely heavily on cobalt from the DRC and lithium from Namibia. By demanding local processing, these African nations are forcing U.S. companies to rethink supply chains. It's no longer enough to extract minerals cheaply and refine them elsewhere. To keep pace, American firms may need to invest in African infrastructure, share technology, and accept terms they once dismissed. Globally, the ripples extend further. Asian economies like China and India, already deep investors in Africa, are adjusting quickly, seizing opportunities that Western companies hesitate to embrace. This leaves Washington and Brussels facing a stark choice: adapt to Africa's new sovereignty or risk losing influence to rivals who already understand the new balance of power. What's happening is bigger than economics, it's geopolitical. Africa is rewriting the rules of engagement, and the rest of the world is discovering just how dependent it has become. The continent, once seen as a warehouse of raw goods, is now holding the keys to the industries of tomorrow. And the question lingers: will the West learn to respect Africa as a partner or cling to an outdated model that no longer exists? Step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. What is happening across Africa is not just a series of isolated policies. It is a continental shift, a rewriting of the rules that have governed global trade for centuries. Gold in Ghana, coffee in Uganda, uranium in Niger, lithium in Namibia, cocoa in Ivory Coast, all are now symbols of a new truth. Africa will no longer give away its wealth without dignity, without conditions, and without a share in the value it creates. But with this new strength comes new risks. Western corporations and governments are unlikely to surrender their privileges quietly. Pressure threats, even covert destabilization, may follow, just as history has shown in countless cases where Africa dared to claim sovereignty. The challenge for African nations will be to stand united, to ensure that short-term hardships do not weaken long-term vision. Because once divided, the old cycle of exploitation can return. And yet the opportunity is extraordinary. By keeping more value at home, Africa can feed its people, employ its youth, and chart a future no longer dependent on foreign dictates. It can become not the hidden engine of someone else's prosperity, but the architect of its own destiny. That is why this moment feels historic. It is not just about economics, it is about justice, self-respect, and the possibility of true freedom. Now the question falls to us. Do you think this wave of resource sovereignty will last, or will powerful nations push back with even greater force to protect their interests? And when you see leaders like President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso take bold steps in the same direction, do you believe his strategies are truly effective, or do you think another generation will have to finish the work he has begun? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré, and subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. Africa is rising, the balance of power is shifting, and together we are witnessing the dawn of a new era.